My sister-in-law slapped me across the face at my own anniversary dinner, in front of my own children, because I served myself a plate of food before she had hers. "You forget your place in this family," she snapped, her hand still raised as if she were proud of it. My husband looked away and said nothing. So I set down my fork, wiped my hands on the linen napkin I had ironed that morning, and slapped her back without a second of hesitation. What none of us knew that night was that the slap was only the first domino, and the family who told me to remember my place had a secret buried so deep it would take 2 years to fully surface. My name is Adrienne Wells, and I grew up in a house at the end of a circular driveway in Nashville. My father, a man who built half the shopping centers in our county from nothing but a construction loan and pure stubbornness. The one thing his money never bought me was a love that belonged only to me. And I found it at 22 in a coffee shop, in a man named Weston Marsh, who drove a car with 200,000 miles on it and sketched buildings at a firm he was not yet senior enough to design for himself. My mother worried once that men who marry into money only learn to tolerate the woman who comes with it. I told her she did not understand what I had found. We married in a small garden ceremony my parents paid for, and Weston family attended with a watchful stiffness I mistook for shyness. It was calculation. His mother, Cordelia, ran her household like a small private empire, and his older sister, Vivienne, unmarried and financially dependent on the family catering business, was its uncontested crown princess. I was a threat to that arrangement whether I intended to be or not, and over the next 11 years I learned to absorb a steady diet of small, precise cuts, always delivered with a smile in front of an audience large enough to make any response feel like an overreaction, always followed by my husband's particular brand of silence. There was one strange exception, the year my son Beckett was born. When Vivian showed up unannounced with a hand-knitted blanket and sat with me for an entire afternoon, asking real questions about motherhood, no audience, no performance. For months afterward, I believed some door between us had actually opened. I told Weston I thought his sister and I might finally understand each other. He just looked at me and said, "Careful," and would not explain what he meant. I would not understand that warning until years later, when I learned Vivian only softened toward people she still needed something from. We had 2 children by then, Harlow, 7 and sharp as a blade, and Beckett, 5, who worshipped his father completely, and I had built a design firm that quietly grew to eclipse Weston income, though I never made him feel small for it. Because my work kept me traveling, Weston had taken over most of our banking, a small arrangement that felt like teamwork at the time. I kept smoothing over every silence his family created because I believed a marriage was something you protected, even in the years it had clearly stopped protecting you back. Our 11th anniversary fell on a Saturday in early autumn, and I wanted for once to celebrate it the way I remembered our first years together. Weston asked if his mother and sister could join us, and because I was still trying, I said yes, spending 3 days on a dinner that mattered more to me than it should have. Cordelia arrived trailing her fingers along the linen like a woman auditing a business she never trusted to succeed. And Vivian arrived 20 minutes late and took the seat at the head of the table, a seat Weston let her have without a glance in my direction. When the food was ready, I served the children first, and then, finally, myself. I had barely lifted my fork when Vivian's open hand crossed the table and struck me hard across the cheek, ringing my ears and blurring my vision white at the edges. "You forget your place in this family," she said, loud enough that Harlow's fork clattered against her plate. I looked at Weston, and he stared down at his own plate as though the tablecloth held something more urgent than his wife's bruised face. Something in me that had been cracking for over a decade finally gave way. I struck her back with the full weight of 11 years of silence, stood and told him plainly that a husband who cannot defend his wife in front of a room full of people does not deserve to remain her husband. I took Harlow, hand in mine and Beckett hand in the other, and walked them straight out of that house. In the car, Harlow, without a word, pressed a cold water bottle from her school bag gently against my cheek and held it there the entire drive. 7 years old and already understanding what none of the adults at that table had been willing to do. My mother opened her door before I even knocked and said, "Come in, baby. You are safe here now." Weston called for 3 straight days before I finally answered, full of an apology dressed up as love but really just fear of consequence. I asked him one question. How many times, over 11 years, had he watched his mother or his sister humiliate me and said nothing? He had no answer because we both already knew it by heart. Strangely, it was Vivian who reached out first, not Weston. A handwritten note arrived at my parents' house, apologizing, calling the slap a moment of stress she deeply regretted, asking to meet privately to make things right before lawyers got involved. Against my better judgment, I almost believed her, until my father, a man who had spent decades reading people across a negotiating table, pointed out that the note never once mentioned what she was actually sorry for, only that she wanted to talk before lawyers got involved. That single detail was the first thread that made me stop trusting anything that family said and start trusting only what I could prove. I filed for divorce 11 days later and hired an attorney named Desmond Kane, a sharp man my father had trusted for decades. I told him plainly what I wanted: my children, my house, and the truth. It was Desmond who found it first, buried in the financial disclosures. More than $60,000 moved out of our joint account over 4 years in small transfers, funneled through Weston to keep his sister catering business afloat. That discovery was not the worst of it. Buried deeper was a notarized quitclaim form attempting to transfer a 10% stake in our house into Cordelia's name, my signature forged at the bottom in ink I had never put there. Then came the twist none of us saw coming. Tracing the same account activity, Desmond investigator found recurring payments to a rental property across town, one Weston had never mentioned, registered to a woman named Paisley Kent. It was not a business expense. Weston had been quietly supporting a second household for nearly 2 years, and part of the missing money had gone there, not only to his sister. When confronted, Weston did not deny it. He simply said it had started as something small that he never knew how to end. The same excuse, I realized. He had used his entire life for every silence he had ever chosen over me. Desmond then found a second, older thread buried in probate records from decades earlier. Cordelia had hidden the actual will of Weston's late father, a will that left the house entirely to Weston outright, with no claim reserved for her at all. She had spent years controlling the family narrative around a document that legally never gave her the power she had always acted like she held, and the current forgery attempt was simply the newest chapter of a pattern she had been running since before I ever entered that family. Every ounce of authority Cordelia had wielded over our lives had been built on a lie she alone had chosen to maintain. The custody proceedings moved forward on a pattern I had not realized I was documenting for years. Photographs and calendar entries showing I had managed every school event and doctor appointment, while Weston deferred to his mother on everything. The court awarded me primary custody with a structured schedule for Weston and a requirement that he account for the missing money. One evening, months into the process, Beckett looked up from his homework and asked his father directly, during a scheduled visit, why he had never stood up when Aunt Vivian hit Mom. Weston had no answer for his own 5-year-old son either, and Beckett never fully looked at him the same way again. Weston, facing a fraud investigation that would have pulled his mother and sister further in, agreed to a settlement including full restitution. Vivian catering business folded within the year, cut off from money that had never truly been hers. Cordelia, facing exposure over both the forged deed and the decades-old hidden will, retreated from any contact with me at all, not out of remorse, I suspect, but fear of what continued closeness might now cost her. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday, and I walked out of that courthouse holding both of my children's hands the same way I had walked them out of that dining room 2 years earlier. Except this time, I was not running from anything. I was walking toward the rest of our lives, in a house that finally, legally, entirely belonged only to us. Renata threw a small dinner for me and the children that week. Nothing elaborate, just her kitchen table crowded with too much food. And it was the first anniversary of any kind where every person at that table actually wanted me there. I served myself first without thinking twice, and nobody so much as blinked. Harlow asked me recently why Aunt Vivian does not come to her birthday parties anymore, and I told her the truth in words a 7-year-old could carry. Some people forget that love is not something you are allowed to take for granted, just because someone keeps giving it freely. And sometimes the people who love us most have to be the ones who finally teach them where that giving stops. I do not think about the slap itself anymore. I have never regretted returning it. I think instead about the 11 years of silence that came before it, and about a family that spent decades building their power on lies, forged signatures, and a will they thought no one would ever read. I learned in the end that the place I truly belonged was never at the foot of someone else's table, waiting my turn for scraps of respect handed out by people who never had the right to hand out anything at all. It was at the head of my own table, in a house that was legally, provably, undeniably mine. Surrounded by children who watch me now and understand exactly what it looks like when a woman finally stops asking permission to be respected. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and join the Revenge Tales for more true stories of betrayal, quiet strength, and the moment the truth finally comes home to collect what it is owed.